The rain hammered against the windows of Henderson and Associates law firm as I sat in the cramped waiting room, still wearing my wrinkled black dress from Grandpa's funeral that morning. My sneakers squeaked against the polished marble floor every time I shifted in my chair, drawing disapproving glances from my relatives who filled the expensive leather seats around me. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. My cousin Bradley straightened his designer tie and whispered something to his mother, Aunt Margaret, who shot me a look of pure disgust. Uncle Richard checked his Rolex for the third time in 5 minutes, clearly annoyed that the reading of Grandpa's will was running behind schedule. My own mother, Susan, sat as far away from me as possible, pretending she didn't know the woman in the discount store dress who'd shown up to claim whatever scraps Grandpa might have left behind. "Donna Walsh," the receptionist called out in a crisp voice, "Mr. Henderson will see all of you now." I stood up too quickly, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. Bradley smirked at his younger brother Cameron, who barely looked up from his iPhone. At 28, I was supposedly the family disappointment, the one who dropped out of law school, bounced between dead-end jobs, and currently worked the night shift at Murphy's Diner downtown. While my cousins drove BMWs and lived in gated communities, I took the bus and shared a studio apartment with a roommate who never paid rent on time. Mr. Henderson's office was exactly what you'd expect from Chicago's most prestigious estate lawyer. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the lake, mahogany furniture that probably cost more than I made in a year, and walls lined with leather-bound books that looked like they'd never been opened. The man himself was in his 60s, with silver hair and a face that had seen more family drama than a soap opera writer. "Please, everyone take a seat," he said, gesturing to the chairs arranged in a semicircle facing his massive desk. "I know this has been a difficult day for all of you, and I appreciate your patience." Aunt Margaret dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, though I noticed she'd somehow managed to keep her makeup perfectly intact throughout the entire funeral. "Poor father," she sighed dramatically. "He worked so hard his entire life to build the Walsh legacy. It's heartbreaking to think it's all over now." Uncle Richard nodded solemnly. 83 years old and still sharp as a tack, right until the end. He was a brilliant businessman, turned that small construction company into Walsh Enterprises. The man was worth more than most people could imagine. I shifted uncomfortably in my chair. Grandpa Harold Walsh had indeed built an empire from nothing. Starting with a single pickup truck and a handful of tools in 1962, he'd grown Walsh Enterprises into one of the largest construction and real estate development companies in the Midwest. Hotels, shopping centers, residential complexes. If you'd driven through Illinois, Indiana, or Wisconsin in the past 30 years, you'd probably seen his work. But while my cousins had grown up in the shadow of that success, attending private schools and summer camps, I'd lived in a different world entirely. My father had died when I was 12, and Mom had struggled to make ends meet. Grandpa helped with the basics. He'd paid for my school clothes and made sure we had food on the table, but he'd never seemed particularly interested in having a relationship with me. "Now then," Mr. Henderson said, opening a thick folder on his desk, "Harold Walsh's last will and testament was updated just 6 months ago, so this reflects his most recent wishes regarding the distribution of his estate." Bradley sat up straighter. As the eldest grandson and current vice president of operations at Walsh Enterprises, everyone assumed he'd inherit the bulk of Grandpa's fortune. Cameron worked in marketing, while both Aunt Margaret and Uncle Richard held executive positions they'd inherited through family connections rather than merit. "I'll start with the smaller bequests," Mr. Henderson continued, adjusting his reading glasses. "To the St. Mary's Children's Hospital, Mr. Walsh leaves $500,000 for the construction of a new pediatric wing." There were murmurs of approval around the room. Grandpa had always been generous with local charities. "To each of his household staff members who have served him for more than 5 years, he leaves $50,000 and his sincere gratitude for their loyal service." More nodding. This was expected. To his daughter, Margaret Walsh Kingston, he leaves his collection of antique furniture, his library, and the sum of $2 million. Aunt Margaret let out a small sob. "He was always so thoughtful," she whispered. To his son, Richard Walsh, he leaves his vintage car collection and the sum of $2 million. Uncle Richard's eyes gleamed. Grandpa's garage housed a 1967 Shelby Cobra, a 1963 Ferrari 250 GTO, and several other classics worth more than most people's houses. To his grandson Bradley Walsh, he leaves his boat, his vacation home in Door County, Wisconsin, and the sum of $3 million. Bradley tried to look appropriately grateful, but I could see the disappointment in his eyes. Everyone had expected him to inherit the company. To his grandson Cameron Walsh, he leaves his art collection and the sum of $3 million. Cameron finally looked up from his phone, probably calculating how much those paintings were worth. "And now we come to the matter of Walsh Enterprises itself," Mr. Henderson said, his voice taking on a more serious tone. "The company, all its assets, properties, and ongoing business operations, along with the remainder of Mr. Walsh's personal estate." The room went dead silent. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for. Walsh Enterprises was worth at least $40 million, possibly more depending on current property values and ongoing projects. He leaves, entirely, to his granddaughter. The words hit the room like a physical blow. For a moment, nobody moved, nobody breathed. Then all hell broke loose. "That's impossible!" Bradley shot to his feet, his face turning red. Aunt Margaret dropped her tissue, staring at Mr. Henderson like he'd just announced that aliens had landed on the roof. "This can't be right," Uncle Richard sputtered. "Father would never. Donna doesn't know anything about running a business." My mother finally found her voice. "Are you absolutely certain about this, Mr. Henderson? Donna's never shown any interest in the company. She dropped out of college, for heaven's sake." I sat frozen in my chair, feeling like I was watching this scene happen to someone else. $40 million? The entire company? The hotels, the construction projects, the real estate portfolio? All of it was mine. Mr. Henderson raised his hand for silence. "I assure you, the will is ironclad. Mr. Walsh was very specific about his intentions. However, there is one condition attached to Miss Walsh's inheritance." Of course there was. There always was with Grandpa. She must take active control of the company within 30 days of today's date and successfully run it for a period of 1 full year. If she fails to do so, or if she attempts to sell the company during that year, the entire inheritance will be divided equally among the other beneficiaries. "A year?" I finally managed to speak, my voice barely above a whisper. "I have to run Walsh Enterprises for a year?" "That's right," Mr. Henderson nodded. "Your grandfather was very clear about this. He believed that true leadership could only be proven through action, not inheritance. You have 30 days to assume control, and if you succeed in maintaining and growing the business for 12 months, everything becomes yours permanently." Bradley was pacing behind his chair now, his hands clenched into fists. "This is insane. She'll run the company into the ground within 6 months. She doesn't have an MBA. She's never worked in construction or real estate. She doesn't even own a car." "Maybe that's exactly why he chose her," Mr. Henderson said quietly. "Harold Walsh built his empire from nothing, remember? Perhaps he saw something in Donna that the rest of you missed." Cameron let out a bitter laugh. "What could he possibly have seen? She's a waitress." The contempt in his voice cut deep, but it wasn't anything I hadn't heard before. My entire life, I'd been the family disappointment. While my cousins were getting degrees from Northwestern and taking European vacations, I was struggling to pay rent and wondering if I'd have enough money for groceries this week. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. "The company's current board of directors will remain in place," Mr. Henderson continued, "but Miss Walsh will have final authority over all major decisions. She'll need to attend board meetings, approve budgets, oversee major projects, and maintain the company's profitability. She can't do it, Aunt Margaret said firmly. I'm sorry, but this is ridiculous. Donna, dear, you should just refuse the inheritance. Let the company go to someone who actually knows how to handle it. Like Bradley, Uncle Richard added. He's been working there for 8 years. He knows the business inside and out. I looked around the room at their faces, some angry, some pitying, all convinced that I was about to make a fool of myself. These were the same people who'd whispered about me at family gatherings, who'd made jokes about my secondhand clothes and community college degree, who'd treated me like a charity case for as long as I could remember. But as I sat there, something shifted inside me. Maybe it was the memory of Grandpa's funeral that morning, when I'd been the only family member who cried real tears. Maybe it was remembering how he used to take me to construction sites when I was little, before the rest of the family decided I wasn't worth their time. Or maybe it was just 28 years of being underestimated finally reaching a breaking point. I'll do it, I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. Donna, think about this, my mother pleaded. You don't understand what you're getting into. This isn't some game. This is a real business with real employees and real responsibilities. I said I'll do it. Mr. Henderson smiled slightly. Very well. I'll have the necessary paperwork prepared. You'll need to report to the Walsh Enterprises headquarters Monday morning to begin the transition. The current executives will brief you on ongoing projects and introduce you to the management team. Bradley's jaw was so tight I thought it might snap. Fine, but when you crash and burn, and you will crash and burn, don't expect any help from us. We'll be waiting to pick up the pieces. I wouldn't dream of asking for your help, I replied, standing up for the first time since Mr. Henderson had dropped his bombshell. After all, according to all of you, I'm just a failure who works at a diner. As I walked toward the door, I could hear them already planning behind me, how they'd document my failures, how they'd be ready to swoop in when I inevitably collapsed under the pressure. They had no idea that their years of dismissal and contempt had just given me the greatest motivation I'd ever had. $40 million and the chance to prove them all wrong. Grandpa Harold, wherever you are, I thought as I stepped out into the Chicago rain, you certainly knew how to make things interesting. Monday morning came faster than I wanted it to. Standing outside the gleaming 40-story Walsh Enterprises tower in downtown Chicago, I felt like David facing Goliath, except David at least had a slingshot. All I had was a borrowed blazer from my roommate Jessica and a fake confidence that was cracking with every passing second. The lobby was a monument to corporate success. Marble floors that reflect everything like mirrors, abstract sculptures that probably cost more than most people's cars, and a reception desk that looked like it belonged on a spaceship. The security guard, a friendly-looking man in his 50s named Tom, checked my ID twice before believing I wasn't there to apply for a janitorial position. Miss Walsh, a woman in her 30s, approached me, her heels clicking against the marble with military precision. Everything about her screamed efficiency, from her perfectly styled auburn hair to her tablet clutched against her chest like armor. I'm Jennifer Collins, your grandfather's executive assistant. I'll be helping you transition into your new role. Jennifer led me to the executive elevator, which required a special key card to access the top floors. As we rose past floor after floor of offices, conference rooms, and busy employees, I tried not to think about how many people's livelihoods now depended on decisions I had no idea how to make. Your grandfather's office takes up the entire 42nd floor, Jennifer explained as the elevator hummed upward. He preferred to have his executive team close by, so the C-suite is all on this level. The doors opened to reveal a space that took my breath away. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Lake Michigan, and the office itself was larger than most apartments. Grandpa's desk sat in the center like a command center, surrounded by leather chairs, built-in bookshelves, and awards spanning 6 decades of business success. The executive meeting starts in 20 minutes, Jennifer said, consulting her tablet. I've prepared briefing materials on the current projects requiring immediate attention. The Riverside Mall renovation, the downtown hotel expansion, and the suburban housing development are all waiting for final approval on budget adjustments. I nodded like I understood what any of that meant. Who else will be at this meeting? The entire executive team.
Your cousin Bradley, of course, as VP of Operations. Cameron handles marketing and public relations. There's also David Morrison, our Chief Financial Officer, Linda Chen, Head of Legal, and Marcus Thompson, who oversees construction operations. Before I could ask any more questions, the conference room door opened and the executives filed in. Bradley entered first, wearing a suit that probably cost more than I made in 3 months. His smile was polite but cold, like a snake offering directions to a mouse. "Good morning, Donna," he said, taking his seat at the large oval table. "I hope you're ready for this. Running a $40 million company isn't quite the same as taking orders for coffee and eggs." The other executives took their seats, their expressions ranging from curious to skeptical. David Morrison, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses, spread financial reports across the table like he was dealing cards. Linda Chen, elegant and sharp-eyed, studied me like a puzzle she needed to solve. Marcus Thompson, built like the construction worker he'd once been, folded his arms and waited to see what I was made of. "Let's start with the Riverside Mall project," Bradley said, sliding a thick folder toward me. "We're 3 weeks behind schedule because the contractors are demanding an additional $2 million for unexpected structural issues. The original budget was $12 million, but now they're saying they need $14 million to complete the work." I opened the folder, confronted by pages of architectural drawings, cost breakdowns, and technical specifications that might as well have been written in ancient Greek. Every eye in the room was on me, waiting to see if I'd crumble under the pressure. "What's your recommendation?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "We need to approve the additional funding," Bradley said smoothly. "The mall owners are threatening to sue if we don't meet our completion deadline, and the penalty clauses would cost us even more than the budget overrun." David Morrison cleared his throat. "Actually, I've reviewed the contractors' claims, and some of their cost increases seem excessive. The structural issues they're citing weren't entirely unexpected. Similar problems came up during the feasibility study." "The feasibility study?" I asked.
"The preliminary investigation we conduct before starting any major project," Linda Chen explained patiently. "It identifies potential problems and helps us estimate realistic costs." Bradley shot David a warning look. The feasibility study was inconclusive about these particular issues. We need to move forward with the funding approval or risk losing the entire contract. Something about Bradley's tone bothered me. He seemed awfully eager to approve spending an extra $2 million, and David's hesitation suggested there might be more to the story. "I'd like to see the original feasibility study," I said, "and I want a detailed breakdown of exactly what these structural issues are and why they're costing so much to fix." Bradley's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Donna, I understand you want to be thorough, but we don't have time for extensive research. The contractors need an answer by Thursday." "Then we'll give them an answer by Thursday," I replied, "after I've reviewed all the relevant information." Marcus Thompson nodded approvingly. "That's smart. I've been in construction for 30 years, and contractors sometimes try to pad their bills when they think nobody's watching closely." "Marcus, with all due respect," Bradley interjected, "you're not seeing the big picture here. This is about maintaining client relationships and protecting the company's reputation." "And I'm trying to protect the company's money," I shot back, surprising myself with how firm I sounded. $2 million is $2 million, whether it's justified or not. The meeting continued for 2 hours, covering project after project that required decisions I felt completely unqualified to make. A luxury hotel expansion that needed environmental impact assessments. A shopping center in Milwaukee where local residents were protesting the construction. A residential development where the city was demanding additional infrastructure improvements. Each time, Bradley had a quick solution that usually involved spending more money or taking the path of least resistance. Each time, other team members offered subtle alternatives that suggested maybe rushing wasn't always the best strategy. And each time, I found myself caught in the middle, trying to learn an entire industry while making decisions that could affect hundreds of jobs and millions of dollars. By lunchtime, my head was spinning. Jennifer showed me to the executive dining room, where I sat alone picking at a Caesar salad while trying to absorb everything I'd learned.
Through the window, I could see construction workers on a building site across the street, and I thought about how Grandpa had started with just a pickup truck and some tools. Mind if I join you? Marcus Thompson appeared in the doorway, carrying a sandwich and a cup of coffee. Please, I said, grateful for some human company that didn't seem to be judging my every word. Marcus sat down across from me, his weathered hands wrapped around his coffee mug. Your first day's always the hardest. I remember when your grandfather hired me 15 years ago, I felt like I was drowning in paperwork and procedures. Did he ever tell you why he left the company? I asked. Because honestly, I'm starting to think he made a mistake. Marcus chuckled. Harold Walsh didn't make mistakes, at least not about people. You know, he used to talk about you sometimes, said you were the only one in the family who asked real questions instead of just nodding along with whatever he said. Real questions? Like when you were 8 years old and asked him why all the construction workers were men. Or when you were 12 and wanted to know why the company didn't build more affordable housing for families like yours. Marcus took a bite of his sandwich. Most kids would ask about money or cars or vacations. You asked about fairness. I didn't remember those conversations, but something about Marcus's words felt familiar, like an echo of a person I used to be before life taught me to keep my head down and my expectations low. Bradley's been positioning himself as the heir apparent for years, Marcus continued quietly. He's not a bad guy, but he thinks like an accountant. Everything's about profit margins and quarterly reports. Your grandfather built this company by taking risks and caring about the communities we work in. What are you saying? I'm saying maybe you should trust your instincts more than you trust other people's opinions, including mine. Marcus stood up, finishing his coffee. That Riverside Mall project, the contractor Bradley wants to pay is his college roommate's company. Might be worth looking into. After Marcus left, I sat alone in the dining room, processing what he'd told me. Bradley's college roommate, that was definitely worth investigating. I spent the rest of the afternoon in my office, reading through project files and trying to understand the intricate web of contracts, timelines, and relationships that kept Walsh Enterprises running. Jennifer brought me stack after stack of documents, each one more complex than the last. Around 6 o'clock, when most of the office had emptied out, there was a knock on my door. Cameron walked in, looking more casual than he had during the morning meeting. "Rough first day?" he asked, settling into one of the chairs across from my desk. That's one way to put it. I leaned back in Grandpa's massive chair, feeling like a child playing dress-up. "Can I ask you something honestly?" "Shoot." "Do you think I can do this? Really?" Cameron was quiet for a moment, studying my face. "You want the truth? I think you're in way over your head. This company is worth $40 million, and you've never run anything bigger than a section of tables at a diner." His honesty stung, but I appreciated it more than Bradley's fake politeness. "But," Cameron continued, "I also think Grandpa was smarter than any of us gave him credit for. He didn't get where he was by making random decisions. If he left you this company, he had a reason." "What kind of reason?" "Maybe he was tired of watching his family get soft. Bradley and I grew up rich. We never had to fight for anything. You've been fighting your whole life." Cameron stood up, heading for the door. "The question is, are you going to keep fighting, or are you going to give up the first time things get complicated?" As I sat alone in that enormous office, surrounded by the weight of $40 million in responsibility, Cameron's words echoed in my mind. I thought about my coworkers at Murphy's Diner, who were probably starting the dinner rush without me. I thought about my studio apartment and my secondhand furniture, and all the times I'd felt like I wasn't good enough for the Walsh family name. But I also thought about that 8-year-old who'd asked why all the construction workers were men, and the 12-year-old who'd wondered about affordable housing for families like yours. Maybe that girl was still in there somewhere, buried under years of being told she wasn't smart enough or ambitious enough or successful enough. Tomorrow, I decided, I was going to find out exactly what kind of relationship Bradley had with that Riverside Mall contractor. And maybe, just maybe, I was going to prove that being underestimated could be the most powerful weapon of all. 3 days after my first board meeting, I was sitting in my car outside Riverside Mall at 7 in the morning, watching construction workers arrive for their shifts. I'd barely slept since Marcus Thompson's revelation about Bradley's college roommate, and I'd spent the past 2 nights researching everything I could find about Phoenix Construction Company. What I'd discovered kept me awake until 3 a.m. Phoenix Construction had been awarded 6 major contracts by Walsh Enterprises over the past 18 months, each one involving mysterious cost overruns that added millions to the original budgets. The company was owned by Derek Morrison, no relation to our CFO David Morrison, who had indeed been Bradley's college roommate at Northwestern University. But the really interesting part was that Phoenix Construction had been incorporated just 2 years ago, with virtually no previous experience in major commercial projects. Armed with a thermos of coffee and a notebook full of questions, I waited until I saw the Phoenix construction foreman arrive. He was a thick-set man in his 40s wearing a hard hat and work boots that had seen better than days. I intercepted him before he could enter the mall. "Excuse me," I called out, approaching with what I hoped was a friendly smile. "I'm Donna Walsh from Walsh Enterprises. Could I ask you a few questions about the project?" The foreman, who introduced himself as Pete Kowalski, looked surprised but not unfriendly. "Sure, Miss Walsh, though I gotta say, this is the first time anyone from your company has come out to actually look at the worksite." That was interesting. Really? No one from our team has been here to inspect the structural issues?
Pete frowned. What structural issues? We've been on schedule and under budget since day one. This is one of the smoothest jobs we've had all year. My stomach dropped. Under budget? But I was told you needed an additional $2 million for unexpected structural problems. Lady, I don't know who told you that, but they're feeding you a load of garbage. We haven't encountered any major structural issues, and we're actually about to finish 2 weeks early. Pete pulled out a clipboard and showed me the progress reports. See for yourself, we're at 95% completion and haven't spent anywhere near the original budget. I stared at the paperwork, my mind racing. If Phoenix Construction wasn't asking for additional money, where was the extra $2 million supposed to go? "Can I ask you something else?" I said carefully. "How many Walsh Enterprises projects has Phoenix Construction worked on?" "This is our first one, actually. Derek, that's our owner, he was pretty excited when your cousin Bradley reached out to us, said it could be the start of a long partnership." The pieces were falling into place, and the picture they formed made me sick to my stomach. Bradley wasn't just approving inflated budgets, he was creating them. Phoenix Construction was doing the actual work for the agreed-upon price, while Bradley was somehow pocketing the difference. I thanked Pete and drove back to the office, my hands shaping on the steering wheel. This wasn't just about poor business decisions or family rivalry, this was embezzlement. Bradley had been stealing from Grandpa's company, possibly for years. Back at Walsh Enterprises, I went straight to Jennifer's desk. "I need to see all the contracts and payment records for Phoenix Construction," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. Jennifer looked confused. "All of them? That's quite a few files. Is there a specific project you're concerned about?" "All of them, and I need them this morning." Within an hour, Jennifer had assembled a stack of folders 3 inches thick. I locked myself in my office and spread the documents across the conference table, looking for patterns. What I found was even worse than I'd imagined. Bradley had created an elaborate system of fake cost overruns, emergency budget approvals, and shell companies. Phoenix Construction would submit the original, reasonable bids, but Bradley would create additional invoices for consulting fees, project management, and structural engineering that went to companies I'd never heard of. Midwest Development Solutions, Great Lakes Consulting, Windy City Project Management. A quick online search revealed that all 3 companies had been incorporated within the past 2 years, all listing the same address, a mailbox rental service in a strip mall on the south side of Chicago. The signatures on the incorporation papers belonged to Derek Morrison, Bradley's college roommate. I was staring at evidence of a systematic fraud that had cost Walsh Enterprises at least $12 million over the past 18 months. No wonder Grandpa had been concerned about the company's future. No wonder he'd bypassed Bradley in his will.
My hands were literally shaking as I reached for my phone to call Linda Chen, our head of legal. But before I could dial, there was a knock on my office door. "Come in," I called out, quickly covering the documents with a random project folder. Bradley walked in, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing his usual confident smile. "Thought you might need some caffeine," he said, setting 1 cup on my desk. "I heard you've been burning the midnight oil, really diving into the business." "Just trying to learn as much as I can," I replied, accepting the coffee while my heart hammered against my ribs. "That's great to hear. You know, I've been thinking about our conversation the other day regarding the Riverside Mall project. I spoke with the contractors again, and they're willing to settle for $1.5 million instead of $2 million for the additional work. Still a significant expense, but it shows they're willing to negotiate." I took a sip of coffee to buy myself time, studying Bradley's face. He looked completely relaxed, like a man without a care in the world. Either he was an excellent actor, or he genuinely believed I was too naive to uncover his scheme. "That's interesting," I said carefully. "What exactly are these structural issues they're dealing with?" "Foundation problems mostly. Some unexpected soil conditions that require additional reinforcement." Bradley gestured vaguely, like the details weren't important. "Very technical stuff. Nothing you need to worry about. I can handle all the engineering specifications." "I'd like to see the site myself," I said, "maybe later this week." For just a moment, Bradley's smile flickered. "That's really not necessary, Donna. Construction sites can be dangerous for people who aren't familiar with the safety protocols. Plus, your time is better spent learning about our other projects." "I think I can handle a hard hat and steel-toed boots." Of course, of course. I just meant that site visits are usually handled by our operations team. But if you really want to see it, I'd be happy to arrange a tour." Bradley stood up, his smile back in place. "Actually, while I'm here, there's something else I wanted to discuss. We have an opportunity to bid on a major airport renovation project, but we need to move quickly. The preliminary proposal is due Friday." He slid another folder across my desk, this one labeled O'Hare Terminal Expansion, Phase 3. This could be huge for us, a $50 million contract that would put Walsh Enterprises in the big leagues. But we need to partner with specialized contractors who have airport security clearance. I opened the folder, already suspecting what I'd find. Sure enough, the proposed primary contractor was listed as Phoenix Construction, with supporting bids from Midwest Development Solutions, Great Lakes Consulting, and Windy City Project Management. A quick online search revealed that all 3 companies had been incorporated within the past 2 years, all listing the same address, a mailbox rental service in a strip mall on the south side of Chicago. The signatures on the incorporation papers belonged to Derek Morrison, Bradley's college roommate. I was staring at evidence of a systematic fraud that had cost Walsh Enterprises at least $12 million over the past 18 months. No wonder Grandpa had been concerned about the company's future. No wonder he'd bypassed Bradley in his will. My hands were literally shaking as I reached for my phone to call Linda Chen, our head of legal. But before I could dial, there was a knock on my office door. "Come in," I called out, quickly covering the documents with a random project folder. Bradley walked in, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing his usual confident smile. "Thought you might need some caffeine," he said, setting 1 cup on my desk. "I heard you've been burning the midnight oil, really diving into the business." "Just trying to learn as much as I can," I replied, accepting the coffee while my heart hammered against my ribs. "That's great to hear. You know, I've been thinking about our conversation the other day regarding the Riverside Mall project. I spoke with the contractors again, and they're willing to settle for $1.5 million instead of $2 million for the additional work. Still a significant expense, but it shows they're willing to negotiate." I took a sip of coffee to buy myself time, studying Bradley's face. He looked completely relaxed, like a man without a care in the world. Either he was an excellent actor, or he genuinely believed I was too naive to uncover his scheme. "That's interesting," I said carefully. "What exactly are these structural issues they're dealing with?" "Foundation problems mostly. Some unexpected soil conditions that require additional reinforcement." Bradley gestured vaguely, like the details weren't important. "Very technical stuff. Nothing you need to worry about." "I'd like to see the site myself," I said, "maybe later this week." For just a moment, Bradley's smile flickered. "That's really not necessary, Donna. Construction sites can be dangerous for people who aren't familiar with the safety protocols. Plus, your time is better spent learning about our other projects. I think I can handle a hard hat and steel-toed boots. Of course, of course. I just meant that site visits are usually handled by our operations team. But if you really want to see it, I'd be happy to arrange a tour. Bradley stood up, his smile back in place. Actually, while I'm here, there's something else I wanted to discuss. We have an opportunity to bid on a major airport renovation project, but we need to move quickly. The preliminary proposal is due Friday. He slid another folder across my desk, this one labeled O'Hare Terminal Expansion, Phase 3. This could be huge for us, a $50 million contract that would put Walsh Enterprises in the big leagues. But we need to partner with specialized contractors who have airport security clearance. This is quite a coincidence, I said, keeping my voice neutral. Not really a coincidence, more like good business sense. We've developed strong relationships with these companies, and they understand our quality standards. Why reinvent the wheel when we have proven partners? Bradley was smooth, I had to give him that. If I hadn't spent the morning talking to Pete Kowalski, I might have actually believed his explanation. I'll need some time to review this, I said, closing the folder. Time is something we don't have much of, Bradley replied, his tone becoming slightly more urgent. The bid deadline is firm, and our competitors are already circling. If we want this contract, we need to move by tomorrow afternoon at the latest. Then I'll review it tonight and give you an answer in the morning. After Bradley left, I sat alone in my office, staring at the evidence of his fraud scattered across my conference table. $12 million stolen from the company Grandpa had spent his life building. Money that should have gone to employee bonuses, equipment upgrades, or community development projects. But as angry as I was also terrified. Bradley wasn't just my cousin, he was the vice president of operations, a respected member of the Walsh family, and someone who'd been with the company for 8 years. If I accused him of embezzlement and couldn't prove it beyond a shadow of a doubt, I'd be the one who looked like a paranoid failure grasping at straws. I needed more evidence. I needed a smoking gun that would make the case impossible to deny.
I called Jennifer and asked her to pull the financial records for all projects involving our preferred contractors over the past 3 years. While she worked on that, I started making a list of every bank account, every invoice, and every payment authorization that could potentially be traced back to Bradley's scheme. Around 8 o'clock that evening, when the office was nearly empty, I heard footsteps in the hallway outside my door. I quickly gathered up the incriminating documents and locked them in Grandpa's personal safe, which Jennifer had given me the combination to earlier that week. Cameron poked his head into my office. "Still here? You know, there's this thing called work-life balance that most people try to maintain." "Just catching up on some reading," I said, gesturing to the legitimate project files still scattered on my desk. Cameron walked over to the window, looking out at the Chicago skyline lit up against the night sky. "Can I ask you something? And I want an honest answer." "Okay." "Are you starting to understand why Grandpa was worried about the company's future?" The question caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" "Come on, Donna, you're not stupid, and neither was he. A man doesn't bypass his obvious heir and leave everything to his outsider granddaughter unless he's got serious concerns about the direction things are heading." I studied Cameron's reflection in the window, trying to read his expression. "Are you saying you think there's something wrong with the way the company's being run?" "I'm saying Grandpa built Walsh Enterprises by being hands-on with every project, every contractor, every major decision. He knew exactly where every dollar was going and why. In the past few years, as his health started declining, he had to delegate more responsibility to the executive team." Cameron turned away from the window to look at me directly. "And I'm saying that some people might have taken advantage of that trust." "Do you have proof of anything specific?" "No," Cameron said quietly, "but I have eyes, and I have a functioning brain. And I've been watching Bradley get a lot richer a lot faster than his salary would suggest." My heart was pounding again. "Cameron, are you telling me you suspect Bradley of stealing from the company?" "I'm telling you that if someone was stealing from the company, now would be the perfect time for them to get nervous about a new CEO, who might start asking inconvenient questions." Cameron headed for the door, then paused.
Be careful, Donna. $12 million is worth killing for, and family relationships don't always matter when that much money is at stake. After Cameron left, I sat alone in the dark office, staring out at the city lights and wondering what the hell I'd gotten myself into. 3 days ago, I was a waitress worried about making rent. Now I was sitting on evidence of massive corporate fraud, being warned that my life might be in danger, and holding the future of a $40 million company in my hands. But as scared as I was also angry. Angry at Bradley for stealing from Grandpa's legacy. Angry at myself for almost falling for his smooth explanations. And angry at everyone who'd spent years telling me I wasn't smart enough or capable enough to handle anything more challenging than taking drink orders. Tomorrow, I decided I was going to start fighting back. And Bradley Walsh was about to learn that the family failure might be a lot more dangerous than anyone had imagined. The next morning, I arrived at the office to find my computer wouldn't accept my password. When I called IT support, they told me there had been a security incident overnight and several executive accounts had been temporarily locked while they investigated potential unauthorized access. "How long will this take?" I asked the technician, a nervous young man named Kevin, who kept glancing toward the elevators like he expected someone to materialize. "Hard to say, Miss Walsh. Could be a few hours, could be longer. We have to run complete diagnostics to make sure no sensitive data was compromised." I had a sinking feeling this wasn't a coincidence. The documents I'd gathered about Bradley's fraud were all in Grandpa's safe, but I'd been using my computer to research the shell companies and cross-reference financial records. If someone had been monitoring my online activity— "Kevin," I said quietly, "who reported this security incident?" He shifted uncomfortably. Mr. Bradley Walsh called it in around midnight, said he'd noticed some unusual login patterns during his evening review of system logs. Of course he had. I thanked Kevin and headed to my office, my mind racing. Bradley was smart. Instead of directly confronting me about my investigation, he was cutting off my access to the evidence while making it look like a routine security measure. By the time IT finished their diagnostics, he'd probably find a way to make the incriminating files disappear entirely. I was unlocking Grandpa's safe when Jennifer knocked on my door. "Ms. Walsh, there's a gentleman here to see you. Says it's urgent business regarding a potential lawsuit." My blood ran cold. A lawsuit was exactly the kind of distraction that could derail my investigation and give Bradley more time to cover his tracks. "Send him in," I said, quickly closing the safe. The man who entered my office looked like he'd stepped out of a legal thriller. Expensive suit, silver hair, briefcase that probably cost more than my car. He introduced himself as Robert Steinberg from Steinberg, Marcus and Associates. "Ms. Walsh, I represent the Riverside Mall Ownership Group," he said, settling into one of my chairs without being invited to sit. "My clients are extremely concerned about the delays and cost overruns on their renovation project." "I wasn't aware there were any delays," I said, carefully. "According to our information, Phoenix Construction has informed your company that they need an additional $2 million and 3 weeks to complete work that should have been finished yesterday." Steinberg opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick document. "My clients are prepared to file suit for breach of contract unless the situation is resolved immediately." I stared at him, my mind spinning. According to Pete Kowalski, the Phoenix construction foreman I'd spoken with yesterday, the project was actually ahead of schedule and under budget. But somehow, the mall owners believe the exact opposite. "Mr. Steinberg, could you tell me exactly who provided this information to your clients?" "I'm not at liberty to disclose our sources, but I can tell you that a representative from Walsh Enterprises contacted the mall ownership group yesterday afternoon to inform them of these complications." A representative from Walsh Enterprises, yesterday afternoon, right after I'd questioned Bradley about the project. "I'd like to review this matter internally before responding to any legal threats," I said. "Could you give me 48 hours?" 24 hours, Steinberg replied firmly. "My clients have already been more than patient." After he left, I sat alone trying to piece together what was happening. Bradley had somehow convinced the mall owners that there were problems with the construction project, problems that didn't actually exist. But why would he create a fake crisis that would make Walsh Enterprises look incompetent?
Unless he was setting me up to fail. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Meet me in the parking garage, level B3, northwest corner. Come alone. A friend. Every instinct I had screamed that this was a terrible idea, but I was running out of options. Someone was playing games with me, and I needed answers. The parking garage was dimly lit and nearly empty at 11 a.m. on a Thursday. My footsteps echoed off the concrete as I made my way to the northwest corner, where a figure waited beside a black sedan. Ms. Walsh? The voice belonged to a woman in her 40s, wearing jeans and a baseball cap pulled low over her face. Thank you for coming. My name is Sarah Chen. I'm Linda's sister. Linda Chen, our head of legal. This was getting more complicated by the minute. Linda can't be seen talking to you directly, Sarah continued, but she wanted you to know that someone's been asking her to prepare legal documents that don't make sense. What kind of documents? Contracts for services that were never actually provided, consulting agreements with companies that don't seem to exist. And yesterday, she was asked to draft a letter to the Riverside Mall owners claiming that Walsh Enterprises was experiencing unforeseen complications with their project. My stomach dropped. Who asked her to draft that letter? Your cousin Bradley. He said it was part of a negotiation strategy to buy more time for construction delays. Sarah pulled a manila envelope from her jacket. Linda made copies of everything before she sent the letter. She's been documenting these requests for months, but she wasn't sure what to do about it until you took over the company. I opened the envelope to find photocopies of dozens of documents, fake consulting contracts, fraudulent invoices, and correspondence with shell companies that existed only on paper. It was everything I needed to prove Bradley's embezzlement scheme. There's more, Sarah said. Linda overheard Bradley on a phone call yesterday. He was telling someone that you were getting too close and they needed to accelerate the timeline before you caused problems for everyone. Accelerate what timeline? She doesn't know, but she's scared. Bradley's been acting paranoid lately, and he's been having a lot of private meetings with people who don't work for Walsh Enterprises. I thanked Sarah and drove back to the office, my mind reeling. Bradley wasn't just stealing money, he was actively sabotaging projects to make me look incompetent. The lawsuit threat, the computer security incident, the false information to the mall owners, it was all designed to create chaos that would force me to fail within my first month as CEO. But I had evidence now, real, documented proof of fraud that even Bradley couldn't explain away. I was so focused on planning my next move that I didn't notice the black SUV following me until I pulled into the Walsh Enterprises parking garage. The SUV continued past the entrance, but something about it made my skin crawl. Back in my office, I immediately called Linda Chen. I need to see you right away, I said, and bring whatever documentation you have about recent contract requests. I'm sorry, Miss Walsh, but I'm not in the office today. Linda's voice sounded strained. I had to leave town unexpectedly for a family emergency. Is everything all right? Your sister didn't mention. My sister? Linda's voice sharpened. I don't have a sister, Miss Walsh. I'm an only child. The line went dead. I sat staring at my phone, my blood turning to ice. If Linda didn't have a sister, then who was the woman who'd given me the documents? And why had she claimed to be someone she wasn't? I grabbed the manila envelope and spread the contents across my desk. The documents looked authentic, but now I wasn't sure what to believe. Were they real evidence of Bradley's crimes, or were they elaborate forgeries designed to trick me into making false accusations? My hands were shaking as I reached for Grandpa's safe to compare these new documents with the evidence I'd gathered yesterday. But when I opened the safe, my heart stopped. It was empty. Every document, every financial record, every piece of evidence I'd collected about Bradley's embezzlement scheme had vanished. The safe that only I was supposed to have access to had been cleaned out completely. I was still staring at the empty safe when Bradley knocked on my office door. Donna, I heard you had some excitement this morning with that lawyer. Is everything all right? He walked into my office like he owned it, which technically he was probably planning to very soon. His expression was concerned and helpful,
But there was something else in his eyes, something that looked almost like satisfaction. "Someone broke into Grandpa's safe," I said, watching his face carefully. "That's terrible. Have you called security? We should contact the police immediately." Bradley pulled out his phone. "I can't believe someone would violate your grandfather's private space like that. What did they take?" "Just some personal documents I was reviewing." "Well, that's a relief. For a moment, I thought it might have been something important, like company financial records or contract information." Bradley smiled sympathetically. "You know, with all the stress you've been under lately, maybe you should consider taking a few days off. Running a company this size can be overwhelming, especially when you're dealing with security breaches and potential lawsuits." "I'm fine," I said firmly. "Of course you are. But the board of directors is concerned about the recent problems, the Riverside Mall situation, the computer security incident, and now this break-in. They're starting to wonder if perhaps you might benefit from some additional support." "What kind of support?" "Well, they've asked me to step in as interim CEO while you get your bearings. Just temporarily, of course, until things stabilize." And there it was, the trap I'd walked right into. Bradley had orchestrated everything: the fake security breach, the fraudulent lawsuit threat, even the mysterious woman claiming to be Linda's sister. He'd stolen my evidence, created crises that made me look incompetent, and now he was positioning himself as the responsible family member who needed to step in and save the company. "The board meeting is scheduled for tomorrow morning," Bradley continued. "I really think it would be best for everyone if you agreed to this arrangement voluntarily. Fighting it would only create more instability for the company." I looked at my cousin, this man I'd grown up with, who'd sat at the same Thanksgiving tables and opened Christmas presents in the same living room, and realized that he was willing to destroy me to get what he wanted. He'd stolen millions from Grandpa's company, and now he was trying to steal my future as well. "I need time to think about this," I said. "Of course, take all the time you need." Bradley headed for the door, then paused. "Oh, and Donna, you might want to be more careful about who you trust. There are a lot of people in this business who would take advantage of someone in your position."
After he left, I sat alone in my office, surrounded by the wreckage of my investigation and my dreams. In less than a week, I'd gone from inheriting a $40 million company to being on the verge of losing everything. But as I sat there, something Cameron had said the night before echoed in my mind. $12 million is worth killing for. I'd been thinking about that phrase in terms of Bradley's motivation for stealing money, but maybe I'd been looking at it backwards. Maybe the question wasn't what Bradley was willing to do for $12 million. Maybe the question was what I was willing to do to get it back. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I'd memorized but never called. "Murphy's Diner, this is Tony." "Tony, it's Donna. Is my old job still available?" "Donna, hell yes, we've been swamped without you. Are you coming back?" "Maybe, but first I need to ask you about something. You still have that cousin who works in computer forensics for the FBI?" FBI Special Agent Maria Santos didn't look anything like what I'd expected. Instead of a stern federal agent in a black suit, she was a woman about my age, wearing jeans and a Chicago Bears sweatshirt, sitting across from me in a corner booth at Murphy's Diner at 11 o'clock on Friday night. "Tony vouches for you," she said, stirring sugar into her coffee. "And Tony's never steered me wrong. But what you're describing sounds like a pretty sophisticated white-collar crime operation. Are you sure you're not just dealing with some creative accounting?" I slid a flash drive across the table. Before my evidence disappeared from the safe, I scanned everything and uploaded it to a secure cloud storage account. Financial records, fake invoices, shell company documentation, it's all there. Maria plugged the drive into her laptop and spent the next 20 minutes reviewing the files, while I nursed my third cup of coffee and tried not to think about the board meeting scheduled for 9 a.m. According to Jennifer, who'd called me at home, the entire board of directors would be voting on Bradley's proposal to remove me as CEO due to recent performance concerns and security lapses. "This is good," Maria said finally, "really good. Your cousin's been running a classic overbilling scheme with some pretty creative variations. The shell companies, the phantom cost overruns, the fabricated consulting fees.
We're looking at systematic fraud totaling somewhere between $12 and $15 million. Can you arrest him? Eventually, yes, but building a federal case takes time, especially when the suspect has had years to cover his tracks. We need more than just financial records. We need proof of intent, documentation of the money trail, and preferably some recorded conversations or insider testimony. How long are we talking about? 6 months, maybe longer. Maria closed her laptop and looked at me seriously. But here's the thing. If Bradley gets control of the company tomorrow, he'll have months to destroy evidence and move money offshore. By the time we're ready to prosecute, there might not be anything left to recover. I felt like I was drowning. So what am I supposed to do? The board meeting is in 10 hours, and I don't have any evidence that hasn't been stolen or discredited. Actually, Maria said with a slight smile, you might have more allies than you think. Tony told me you used to work here, so you understand how to read people. Have you considered that maybe some of your other family members know more than they're letting on? That stopped me cold. What do you mean? Think about it. Bradley's been stealing millions of dollars for years. That kind of money doesn't just disappear into thin air. It gets spent, invested, or hidden. Someone else in your family has probably noticed that Bradley's lifestyle doesn't match his salary. I thought about Cameron's warning about people getting rich faster than their salaries would suggest, about Marcus Thompson's hint that Bradley's college roommate connection was worth investigating, about Linda Chen's months of documenting suspicious legal requests. You think other people in the company suspect what's happening? I think people always notice when someone's living beyond their means. The question is whether they're willing to speak up about it. Maria stood to leave. Here's my advice. Forget about the board meeting for now. Focus on finding people who've been watching Bradley as carefully as you have. Sometimes the best evidence comes from the least expected sources. After Maria left, I sat alone in the diner where I'd worked for 3 years, surrounded by the smell of coffee and hamburgers and the sound of late-night conversation. Tony brought me a piece of apple pie I didn't want and sat down across from me. You look like someone who's carrying the weight of the world, he said. Close enough. I picked at the pie crust. Tony, can I ask you something? In all the time I worked here, did I ever seem like someone who could run a $40 million company? Tony laughed. Donna, you were the only waitress I ever had who reorganized my entire inventory system, figured out which suppliers were overcharging me, and convinced 3 of my regular customers to start paying their tabs on time instead of letting them run up for months. That's different from running a construction company, is it? You think managing people and money and problems is really that different, whether you're dealing with a diner or a corporation? Tony leaned forward. I've been in business for 30 years. You know what the most important skill is? Knowing when someone's trying to screw you over. And honey, you've got that in spades. I drove home that night thinking about what Tony had said. Maybe I'd been approaching this all wrong. Instead of trying to prove I was smart enough or experienced enough to run Walsh Enterprises, maybe I should focus on proving that Bradley wasn't trustworthy enough to run it. Saturday morning, instead of going to the office, I drove to Marcus Thompson's house in Oak Park. He answered the door in work clothes, looking surprised to see me. Miss Walsh, is everything all right? Marcus, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Do you think Bradley has been stealing from the company? Marcus looked around his front yard like he was checking for surveillance, then invited me inside. His house was modest but well-maintained, filled with family photos and furniture that looked like it had been chosen for comfort rather than status. You want some coffee? He asked, leading me to his kitchen. I want the truth. Marcus poured 2 cups of coffee and sat down across from me at his kitchen table. Your grandfather asked me the same question about 6 months before he died. My heart skipped. He suspected Bradley? Harold was a lot of things, but he wasn't stupid. He'd been in business for 60 years, and he knew what things should cost. When projects started coming in with budgets that didn't make sense, he started asking questions. What kind of questions? Why would a shopping center renovation that should cost $8 million suddenly require $12 million? Why were we using the same contractors for every project when we used to bid everything competitively? Why our profit margins were shrinking even though we were charging higher fees? Marcus pulled a manila folder from a kitchen drawer and slid it across the table. Your grandfather asked me to keep track of anything that seemed off. I've been documenting inconsistencies for almost a year. I opened the folder to find detailed notes, photographs of invoices, and even copies of emails between Bradley and various contractors. It was exactly the kind of evidence I'd lost when someone cleaned out Grandpa's safe.
Why didn't you report this to someone? Report it to who? Bradley's the VP of operations, your Uncle Richard is on the board of directors, and your Aunt Margaret handles investor relations. Half the family is either directly involved in running the company or benefits from its success. Marcus shook his head. Besides, I'm just a construction supervisor. Who's going to believe my word against the Walsh family heir? They'll believe mine. Will they? Because from what I hear, the board meeting on Monday is going to be pretty much a formality. Bradley's already convinced most of the directors that you're in over your head. Monday? I thought the meeting was this morning. What happened to today's meeting? Marcus looked confused. There's no meeting today. The board meeting got moved to Monday morning when Linda Chen said she had important information that could affect the vote. Linda Chen. The woman whose sister had given me documents that might or might not be authentic. The woman who'd supposedly left town for a family emergency, but then called to say she didn't have a sister? Marcus, I need you to do something for me. Can you call the other department heads, people who've been with the company for more than 5 years, and ask them to meet with me tomorrow, unofficially? What are you planning? I'm planning to find out exactly how many people have been watching Bradley steal from this company and wondering when someone was finally going to do something about it. Sunday afternoon, I found myself in the conference room of a Holiday Inn near the airport, facing 7 Walsh Enterprises employees who'd agreed to Marcus's invitation to attend an informal discussion about the company's future. Besides Marcus, there was Janet Williams from accounting, Roberto Silva from project management, Patricia Kim from human resources, Frank Murphy from equipment operations, Dana Rodriguez from client relations, and Kevin Yang from IT, the same Kevin who told me about the security breach that had locked me out of my computer. Before we start, I said, I want everyone to know that this conversation is completely voluntary. If anyone wants to leave, there won't be any consequences. Nobody moved. Good. Then let me ask you a direct question. How many of you have suspected that someone in the company has been stealing money? Every hand in the room went up. For the next 3 hours, I listened to stories that painted a picture of systematic fraud stretching back almost 2 years. Janet had noticed payments to consulting companies that never seemed to provide any actual services. Roberto had questioned cost overruns on projects he was personally supervising. Patricia had been asked to process expense reimbursements for business meetings that never appeared on anyone's calendar. Frank had watched equipment purchases that never resulted in any new equipment appearing at job sites. Dana had fielded complaints from clients about work they'd been charged for but never received. And Kevin had discovered that someone had been remotely accessing financial databases during off hours using administrative credentials that belonged to accounts that should have been inactive. The security breach on Thursday wasn't random, Kevin admitted. I was instructed to lock specific user accounts and run diagnostics that would keep certain people away from certain files for at least 24 hours. Who gave you those instructions? Mr. Bradley Walsh. He said there had been unusual network activity and he was concerned about corporate espionage. I looked around the room at these people who'd been watching the company they cared about get robbed piece by piece while feeling powerless to stop it. Why didn't any of you report what you were seeing? Patricia spoke up first. Because we're employees, not owners. Bradley Walsh is the grandson of the founder and the presumptive heir. Even if we'd reported our suspicions, who would have believed us over him? And honestly, Janet added, we all assumed that Harold Walsh knew what was happening and was handling it privately. It wasn't until he died and left the company to you that we realized he might not have been aware of the full scope of the problem. Or, Marcus said quietly, he was aware of it, and that's exactly why he left the company to someone outside the immediate family circle. The room went silent as everyone absorbed the implications of that statement. So, what do we do now? Roberto asked. I thought about Maria Santos's advice about finding allies in unexpected places. I thought about Tony's words about knowing when someone was trying to screw you over. And I thought about Grandpa's decision to trust me with his life's work when everyone else thought I was just a failure. Now, I said, we give Bradley Walsh exactly what he's been asking for.
We're going to hand him control of Walsh Enterprises on a silver platter. Kevin looked confused. I thought we were trying to stop him. We are, but sometimes the best way to catch a thief is to give them enough rope to hang themselves. I smiled for the first time in days. And I've got a feeling that Bradley's about to find out that being CEO comes with a lot more scrutiny than being VP of Operations. Dana raised her hand tentatively. Ms. Walsh, are you sure about this? If you voluntarily step down, you might not get another chance to prove what's been happening. I'm not stepping down, I said. I'm setting a trap. And by Wednesday morning, everyone in Chicago is going to know exactly what kind of man Bradley Walsh really is. Monday morning arrived with the kind of gray Chicago sky that matched my mood perfectly. I walked into the Walsh Enterprises building at exactly 8:30, wearing my best suit and carrying a briefcase that contained what I hoped would be the end of Bradley's criminal career. The boardroom on the 41st floor was already buzzing with conversation when I arrived. The entire board of directors had assembled, 12 people who represented decades of business experience and millions of dollars in invested interests. Uncle Richard sat at the head of the table in his expensive suit, looking every inch the successful executive. Aunt Margaret had positioned herself near the windows, her jewelry catching the morning light like armor. Bradley stood near the presentation screen, remote control in hand, looking confident and prepared. He'd clearly spent the weekend creating a compelling case for why I should be removed as CEO. Charts and graphs filled the screen behind him, showing declining performance metrics and budget overruns that painted a picture of a company in crisis.
Good morning, everyone, I said, taking my seat at the opposite end of the table from Uncle Richard. I appreciate you all taking time for this meeting. Donna, Uncle Richard began, his voice carrying the weight of family authority. We're here because the board has serious concerns about the direction of the company under your leadership. In less than 2 weeks, we've seen security breaches, potential lawsuits, and significant budget irregularities that threaten our reputation and financial stability. I nodded thoughtfully. I understand your concerns, and after spending the weekend reviewing the situation, I've come to the conclusion that you're absolutely right. The room went silent. Bradley's confident expression flickered with surprise. I'm not qualified to run Walsh Enterprises, I continued. I don't have an MBA, I've never managed a major corporation, and I clearly lack the experience necessary to handle the complex challenges facing this company. Bradley recovered quickly, his smile returning. Donna, I think that's a very mature assessment. It takes real wisdom to recognize when a situation is beyond your capabilities. Which is why, I said, opening my briefcase, I've spent the weekend preparing a comprehensive transition plan that will ensure the company's continued success under new leadership. I pulled out a thick folder and placed it on the table. However, before we proceed with any leadership changes, I think the board should be aware of some information that's come to my attention regarding our current financial situation. Uncle Richard leaned forward. What kind of information? Well, for instance, did you know that the Riverside Mall project, the one that's supposedly experiencing costly delays and structural problems, is actually ahead of schedule and under budget? Bradley's face went pale, but he recovered quickly. I'm not sure where you're getting that information, but from Pete Kowalski, the Phoenix construction foreman working on the site. I spoke with him personally. I opened the folder and pulled out a photograph. This was taken yesterday morning. As you can see, the project is nearly complete. I passed the photo around the table, watching the board members' expressions change from confusion to concern. But we received a formal notice about cost overruns, Aunt Margaret said. Bradley showed us the documentation from the contractors. Actually, Margaret, you received documentation that Bradley created. I pulled out another set of papers. These are the real invoices from Phoenix Construction, provided by their accounting department. As you can see, they've never requested additional funding for this project. Bradley stood up abruptly. This is ridiculous. Donna is obviously desperate to deflect attention from her own failures by making wild accusations. Sit down, Bradley. The voice came from the doorway, where Linda Chen had just entered carrying a laptop and a file box. I think the board needs to hear what I have to say. Linda, Bradley said, his voice strained, I thought you were out of town dealing with a family emergency. I was dealing with an emergency, but not the kind you think.
Linda set her laptop on the table and opened it. For the past 6 months, I've been documenting requests for legal documents that didn't make sense, contracts for services never provided, consulting agreements with companies that exist only on paper, and correspondence with shell corporations designed to hide money transfers. She clicked on a file, and the presentation screen filled with scanned documents. These are copies of every fraudulent contract, every fake invoice, and every suspicious legal request I've been asked to process since January of last year. The room erupted in whispers and shocked exclamations. Bradley was gripping the back of his chair so tightly his knuckles had turned white. Furthermore, Linda continued, I have recordings of phone conversations in which Bradley Walsh discussed managing the new CEO problem and accelerating the timeline before she causes trouble for everyone. Recordings? Uncle Richard's voice was barely above a whisper. Illinois is a one-party consent state for recording conversations. As the company's legal counsel, I felt it was my duty to document potential criminal activity. Linda clicked another file, and Bradley's voice filled the room through the laptop speakers. She's getting too close to the Phoenix construction connection. We need to move faster. Yes, I can create enough chaos to justify removing her within a week. The board will vote for anything if they think the company's in danger. The recording continued for several minutes, detailing Bradley's plan to sabotage my leadership and frame me for the very problems he'd created. By the time it finished, the boardroom was completely silent, except for the sound of Bradley's labored breathing. This is entrapment, Bradley said desperately. You can't use illegally obtained recordings. Actually, we can. FBI Special Agent Maria Santos entered the room, flanked by 2 other federal agents. Maria placed her badge on the table, where everyone could see it. Bradley Walsh, you're under arrest for wire fraud, embezzlement, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit corporate fraud. As the agents moved to handcuff Bradley, he turned to face me with an expression of pure hatred. You think you've won? Do you think this changes anything? You're still nothing but a waitress who got lucky. This company will be bankrupt within 6 months under your leadership. Maybe, I said calmly, but at least it'll be honest bankruptcy, not theft disguised as business expenses. The agents led Bradley away, while the board members sat in stunned silence. Uncle Richard was staring at the evidence scattered across the table like he couldn't quite process what he was seeing. How long has this been going on? He asked finally. According to our preliminary investigation, approximately 18 months, Maria replied. We estimate total losses between $12 and $15 million, though that number could change as we dig deeper into the financial records. Aunt Margaret looked like she was about to faint. $15 million? How did we not know? Because Bradley was very careful to hide his activities behind legitimate-looking projects and vendors. He used his position as VP of Operations to approve budget increases and contractor payments that bypassed normal oversight procedures. And because, I added, looking around the table at my family members, nobody wanted to believe that Harold Walsh's golden boy grandson could be capable of stealing from the company he was supposed to inherit. Cameron, who had been silent throughout the entire meeting, finally spoke up. Donna, how long have you known about this? I started suspecting something was wrong on my first day, when Marcus Thompson mentioned Bradley's connection to Phoenix Construction. But I didn't have solid proof until this weekend when I discovered that several company employees had been documenting suspicious activities for months. Why didn't they report it sooner? Uncle Richard asked.
Because they were afraid nobody would believe them over a member of the Walsh family, I replied. And honestly, they were probably right. If I'd accused Bradley of embezzlement without overwhelming evidence, you would have assumed I was just making excuses for my own incompetence. The silence that followed was heavy with uncomfortable truth. Maria Santos closed her laptop and gathered her materials. The FBI will need to conduct a complete audit of the company's finances, which may take several weeks. In the meantime, normal business operations can continue under current management. After the federal agents left, the board members sat around the table looking shell-shocked. Everything they'd believed about the company's recent performance had been turned upside down. Budget problems they'd attributed to my inexperience had actually been the result of systematic theft. Security issues they'd blamed on my poor leadership had been created by Bradley to cover his tracks. So, what happens now? Aunt Margaret asked quietly. Now we rebuild, I said. We restore client confidence, we implement new oversight procedures, and we make sure something like this never happens again. And you think you're qualified to handle all that? Uncle Richard's tone wasn't hostile anymore, just genuinely curious. I think I'm qualified to surround myself with honest people who are smarter than I am and listen to their advice. I think I'm qualified to ask questions when things don't make sense instead of just assuming other people know better. And I think I'm qualified to care more about the company's integrity than about maintaining family relationships that were built on lies. Patricia Kim from HR, who had been sitting quietly in the back of the room, stood up. If I may, I'd like to say something. Uncle Richard nodded for her to continue. I've worked for this company for 12 years, and I've watched it change dramatically over the past 2 years. Not just financially, but culturally. Employees have been afraid to report problems or suggest improvements because they were worried about retaliation. Projects have been mismanaged, and good people have quit because they couldn't work in an environment where corruption was ignored. Patricia looked directly at me. In the past week, Miss Walsh has done something that should have been done years ago. She listened to the people who actually do the work and took their concerns seriously. That's not inexperience. That's leadership. One by one, the other employees who had attended our secret Sunday meeting entered the boardroom. Marcus Thompson, Janet Williams, Roberto Silva, Frank Murphy, Dana Rodriguez, and Kevin Yang, the people who had kept the company running while Bradley was stealing it blind. We wanted to show our support for Miss Walsh's continued leadership, Marcus said. She's proven that she's willing to fight for this company's integrity, even when it means going up against her own family. Janet Williams stepped forward with a thick folder. We've also prepared a preliminary recovery plan for the stolen funds. Based on our analysis, we believe we can recover approximately 60% of the missing money through asset seizure and insurance claims. Uncle Richard looked around the room at all these people who had come forward to support me, people whose names he probably didn't even know, despite working in the same building for years. All in favor of maintaining Donna Walsh as CEO of Walsh Enterprises, he said, finally. Every hand in the room went up, even at Margaret's. Motion carries, Uncle Richard said with a slight smile. Congratulations, Donna. The company is yours to rebuild. As the board members filed out of the room, I found myself alone with Cameron, who had lingered behind while everyone else left. Can I ask you something? He said. When did you stop being the family failure and start being the family savior? I thought about the question for a moment, remembering the scared young woman who had sat in Mr. Henderson's office just 2 weeks ago, convinced she wasn't worthy of her grandfather's trust. I think, I said finally, it happened when I realized that being underestimated isn't a weakness, it's a superpower. Nobody saw me coming because they were all too busy looking down on me to notice what I was actually capable of. Cameron laughed. Grandpa would have been proud. I hope so, because now comes the hard part, actually running a $40 million company that's been sabotaged by its own vice president. You'll figure it out, Cameron said confidently. After all, you just took down Bradley with nothing but determination and a network of diner connections. How hard could corporate management be? 6 months later, I stood in the same law office where this entire journey had begun, but everything felt different now. The mahogany furniture and leather-bound books no longer intimidated me. The view of Lake Michigan through the floor-to-ceiling windows reminded me of the view from Grandpa's office, my office now. Mr. Henderson smiled as he pulled out a final folder from Harold Walsh's estate. Your grandfather left specific instructions that this envelope should only be opened after you'd successfully run the company for 6 months. My hands shook slightly as I broke the wax seal. Inside was a handwritten letter in Grandpa's familiar scrawl, along with a small velvet box. My dear Donna, the letter began, if you're reading this, it means you've proven what I always knew, that courage and integrity matter more than pedigree and privilege. I didn't leave you the company because I thought you'd be perfect at running it. I left it to you because I knew you'd fight to make it better. I paused, remembering those first terrifying days when I'd felt so out of place in the corporate world. Bradley was smart and ambitious, but he lacked something essential,
the ability to see people as more than just obstacles or opportunities. You've always seen people as they really are, which is why they trust you. That's not a skill you can learn in business school. The letter continued for 2 pages, describing observations Grandpa had made about my character over the years, things I'd never realized he'd noticed. How I'd always asked about the workers when we visited construction sites, how I'd questioned why certain neighborhoods never seemed to get nice developments, how I'd treated everyone with the same respect, regardless of their position or wealth. I knew Bradley was stealing from the company, he wrote. I had been gathering evidence for months before my death. But I realized that simply firing him wouldn't solve the deeper problem, the culture of entitlement that had infected our family business. You were the only one I could trust to root out the corruption completely and rebuild something better. I opened the velvet box to find a simple gold ring, engraved with the Walsh family motto, "Built to last." It was the ring Grandpa had worn every day of his adult life. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat gently. There's one more thing. Your grandfather established a scholarship fund for students from working-class backgrounds who want to study business or construction management. He wanted you to oversee it personally. How much money are we talking about?
$5 million, enough to help approximately 200 students over the next decade. I slipped the ring onto my finger, feeling the weight of both the gold and the responsibility it represented. The past 6 months had been a whirlwind of recovery and rebuilding. The FBI investigation had uncovered even more fraud than we'd initially suspected. Bradley had stolen nearly $18 million total, but we'd recovered most of it through asset seizure and insurance claims, and Walsh Enterprises was now stronger than ever. More importantly, we'd transformed the company culture completely. We'd implemented transparent bidding processes, regular financial audits, and an anonymous reporting system for employees to raise concerns without fear of retaliation. Our profit margins had actually improved once we eliminated the systematic theft that had been bleeding money for years. Bradley himself was facing federal charges that would likely result in a 10-year prison sentence. Derek Morrison and his shell companies had been shut down, and several other contractors who'd participated in the fraud scheme were cooperating with authorities in exchange for reduced sentences. Uncle Richard had stepped down from the board of directors in shame, admitting he should have questioned the budget irregularities years earlier. Aunt Margaret had actually apologized to me, a conversation I never thought I'd have, and had thrown herself into supporting the company's new community outreach programs. Cameron had become my most trusted advisor, using his marketing expertise to rebuild client relationships and restore Walsh Enterprises' reputation. We'd even hired Tony's nephew to oversee our new apprenticeship program for young people from underserved communities. But perhaps the most satisfying change was watching the employees who'd risked their careers to support me during those dark days flourish in their new roles. Marcus Thompson was now VP of Operations. Marcus had been promoted to Chief of Staff, and Linda Chen had expanded the legal department to ensure compliance with new oversight regulations. As I left Mr. Henderson's office that day, I drove not to the Walsh Enterprises Tower, but to Murphy's Diner. Tony was behind the counter, wiping down glasses and arguing with a customer about the Bears' chances next season. "Well, if it isn't the famous CEO," he said with a grin. "Are you here to offer me a job at your fancy company?" "Actually, I'm here to offer you something better." I slid a business proposal across the counter. "How would you feel about opening 3 more locations? Walsh Enterprises is looking for partners in our new employee dining program." Tony's eyes widened as he read through the numbers. "Donna, this is life-changing money. You gave me a chance when nobody else would. You taught me that success isn't about where you come from. It's about how you treat people and whether you're willing to work for what matters." As I sat in that familiar booth, eating a slice of Tony's apple pie and watching the dinner rush begin, I thought about the 8-year-old girl who'd asked Grandpa why all the construction workers were men. She'd grown up to become a woman who'd hired the first female construction crew in Walsh Enterprises history. I thought about the 12-year-old who'd wondered about affordable housing. She'd just approved the company's first low-income housing development funded by the money we'd recovered from Bradley's theft. And I thought about the 28-year-old failure who'd walked into a law office 6 months ago, convinced she wasn't worthy of her grandfather's trust. She'd discovered that being underestimated was the greatest gift anyone had ever given her.
My phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer. Board meeting moved to tomorrow at 10 a.m. Agenda, final approval for the Walsh Community Development Initiative. I smiled, finishing my pie and leaving a generous tip for the current waitress, a single mother named Rosa who reminded me a lot of myself not so long ago. Outside, Chicago was lighting up against the evening sky, and I could see the Walsh Enterprises building glowing among the other downtown towers. $40 million and counting, all built on the foundation Grandpa had laid brick by brick, decision by decision, person by person. The family failure had become the family legacy, and it felt exactly right. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.